Good evening, everybody. Welcome. We are going to go ahead and get started. Well, those of you online can't see the flag, but it's right over there. So we'll get started with the pledge. All in attendance, please rise. If you're wearing a hat, please remove it. And join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you. Welcome to the February meeting of Palomar Amateur Radio Club, and happy birthday to Palomar Amateur Radio Club. Those of you online, we have cake. Sorry, we didn't save you any. We'll have some pictures of the cake in the scope for next month so you can see what you missed out on. Those of you in the room, was it good? Yeah, we're getting a lot of thumbs up and good, and people having their mouths full. So fantastic. Let's see. I don't remember what order we're supposed to go in, so I'm going to call on Glenn because he's in the middle of getting cake to give us a membership report. Sorry.
So hope everyone can hear me. So I've been very busy the last couple of weeks trying to make some updates to the membership system, because a lot of people now, I think we now have over 80 people who are on auto pay through PayPal. So that's a very good thing. And so I've spent the last bunch of days doing that, and also sending out reminders to people whose dues were coming up, and sending, oops, I forgot to send you a reminder in time for those who hadn't. And we're now back up to 150 people in the signed up membership roster. So that's the membership. If you have any questions, send an email, membershipchair@palomar.org.
PalomarARC.org. Palomar.org will not get you to the right place. Okay, great. Thank you, Glenn. That's great news. I love to hear that number actually came up a little bit. So that's good. I don't see Mark. Oh, there's Mark. Hi, Mark. You want to talk to us about Repeater Tech?
Hi, Joe. Well, we made a run up. First thing, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
All right, we made a run up the mountain last Saturday. We were surprised at the amount of snow left on the ground. It was hard and icy. We managed to get the Cat 5e from our internet link and also the access point into the repeater building and underground. Our difficulties were we were concerned about ice building up on the cable above ground. So it's in the conduit and down below. We got it into the building, but we didn't have the waterproof connectors that it was thought we should use. So a further trip will get us the last 5 feet. They always talk about fiber into the home. It's always the last half mile or the last little bit. So we'll get the last little bit the next trip. I also did measurements for the modernization project on the amount of rack space that we've got left, measurements on the benches for the STEM part of the project. And then we flew the drone in a whole bunch of different areas to figure out where to put the tower, the new tower.
Okay. All right, Charlie. I'm going to invite Charlie NN3V up here to twist your arms and help out with this modernization project. Hopefully everybody saw the scope. We had a great article in there about the modernization project and lots of other fun stuff. So Charlie?
Thank you. You'll excuse my voice. Don't ever get throat cancer. This is the after effect. Mark just mentioned some of the preliminary tasks of our modernization project. As you may have seen in scope, we have $18,000 to buy toys with. And we're going to transform our entire site to the 21st century. Web access to all of the web controllable equipment, an HF transceiver site with a new tower and a separate VVA feed antenna controllable from anywhere in the world. The idea being supporting the NRL. The NRL is worried that ham radio seems to be destined to be a list of silent keys. We're not attracting young, technically inclined people. One of the things that this transceiver will do is let hams who live in homeowners associations actually have an HS site. All these things we have to build in the next 12 to 18 months. Mark is our chief engineer. Ben is one of our software engineers, along with, where do you go? Glenn, where are you? Over here. So I have a list that I'm selecting names of anyone who might be interested in working this. This is going to be a hands-on type, cable, ratchets, welding, software, tiny technology pieces. If you start with no license, you'll graduate with a PhD in advanced class. We're encouraging that everybody attracts young people who might be interested in technology. This is a chance for them to really see what 21st century communications is all about. They all fail to realize that they have a radio and they know nothing about it. I have a list. Some of you, I thank you for putting your names in. I want to see you because your handwriting on your email address kind of hard to figure out. And we have a meeting every Tuesday night, non-mandatory, on Zoom from 6:30 to 7:30, where you can hear what the leaders have done, what the plans are, when it's going to be available to doing, and you can choose to volunteer and help out. It's also a great chance to go up to Palomar Mountain and see some of the most beautiful scenery in Southern California. Any questions? Oh, I'm fun. If you want to volunteer, I have the list. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Charlie. And for those of you online, if you want to get on that list to Charlie, you can either email him nn3vham@gmail. Oh, nn3v@awrl.net. Okay. Let's see. I actually got the agenda up here so I could know where I'm supposed to be. And I forgot to ask visitors, first-time visitors in the room. Anybody first time? What? Yeah. Name, call sign, and location. KG6VAE Tom from Oceanside. Welcome. Another Tom. KM6KFC. Kilo Sierra Charlie. Okay. Oh, CERT Oxcom for Carlsbad. That's fantastic. I'm on the Oceanside CERT communications team. I'm also, Oh, great, fantastic. I saw another yes. Scott WB4CQD from Encinitas. All right. Yes, sir.
Yeah, my name is Dan Turgeon. I can tell you what my license number was 50 years ago, but the one that was just reissued, I haven't remembered yet.
So Dan had a license 50 years ago, but has a new license that is not memorized yet. And you're from?
That's me, and I'm from
Oceanside. Fantastic. First-time visitors online. I think I recognize everybody. Okay, fantastic. Well, welcome to all of the new guys. Thank you for being here. I'd like to hear later if you can talk to me afterwards. I'd like to hear how you heard about this. If it was because I did some pushes on social media to try to get the word out. So I'd like to hear about that afterwards. Okay. No goodie table, except that we have a bunch of historical club photographs and stuff back there on the table. So if you're in the room here, go ahead and take a look at that. Don't take anything. I still need to scan all of that stuff. So some of that will also be in the scope next month for recapping of the birthday celebrations.
How long have we been in business?
8 years, 87 years? Yeah. Okay.
Why that particular year? Is it because Palomar Observatory came to existence and they built a road to take the lens, and that's when they put up?
Oh no, the Palomar Amateur Radio Club has nothing to do with the observatory, other than we happen to have space near them. We're not. The same mountain, yeah. There's a lot. There's a lot on that mountain. Okay. All right. Well, without further ado, then I will turn it over to our presenter for the evening, and you're going to learn all about Parks on the Air from Marty AF5T. So come on up, Marty, and I will. You can give me just a second to get the presentation up on the screen and shared.
All right. Good evening, everybody. And I'd like to thank the Palomar Amateur Radio Club and especially Chris, KD9LF for inviting me and talk about two of my probably greatest passions, which are the great outdoors as well as ham radio, and not necessarily in that order. So what I'd like to do tonight is give a brief introduction into what PODA or Parks on the Air is, what we do when we go to the park, or what people do at home when they hunt for park activations and collect points. But before I start, really, how many of you have heard of PODA previously? So probably half the room has heard of PODA. And how many have actually done PODA before, either as a hunter or an activator? All right, we got 3 people there. That's yes. So those are the two folks. So folks that are in the park, they're called activators. They're activating a park, and anybody else in the world that listens to them and lends a QSO with those folks, they're called hunters, because they're hunting for specific parks and specific hams. What I'd like to do is very quickly go into what is Parks on the Air. So basically, it's a radio sport program that arose back in 2016. And the reason it started really was people had participated in something called the National Parks on the Air, which was an ARRL sponsored event. And so a lot of people thought, oh, that's really cool. And why can we not do that every day? Why do we have to basically wait for a annual event for that? So this bunch of people that really participated in a discussion to basically start an organization called PODA, and they decided to organize it in a way that anytime somebody goes to a state park, builds up their antenna and radio station in that park boundary, they could basically be hunted by other hams, no matter where they are. And then you would have some sort of point and reward system to reward people that activate parks, but also reward people that hunt for these parks. And then basically today, PODA is managed by a large number of volunteers, and I outlined some of them. So it's basically, you see the administrator, Jason Johnson, who was involved since the foundation of PODA. And you have a large number of advisors and people that help both on the organizational side as well as the technology side. I'd like to point out Thomas Martin, W8TAM, because Tom is actually responsible for kind of modernizing the PODA submissions, kind of how files, how QSOs, how logs are uploaded to PODA itself. So as of 2021, there's over 8,000 hams that have registered. I believe the number, don't quote me on that, is greater than 13,000 hams today. And over 2 million QSOs have been logged between hams that participate in PODA. And you can actually go to the two websites, Parks on the Air and the actual interface that gets mostly used when you're doing PODA, which is poda.app. And if we can go to the next slide, please. Of course, I waited till Joe was in the back of the room to say that. Oh, it's actually working. So what's let's see. So what's an activator? So activators need to be registered, and they submit activation logs. And what is allowed in PODA is self-spotting. So meaning, if you decide you want to activate Torrey Pines, you can go on the PODA website and then select, okay, I'm going to be doing activation there later today. And that is allowed. And so it tells other people, like hunters, they can watch out for that person on whatever frequency they're on, or whatever mode they decide to activate the park with. Basically, I think the most critical piece in PODA is really understanding what is the boundary of your park, because the really strict rule is you have to be within the park boundary for PODA activation to count. So both you, your equipment, and your antenna have to be legally located within the park boundaries. And they also have to be during a time when the park is open. And then, of course, very important is don't create safety hazard when you set up your gear. And also, if the park ranger tells you, okay, you really shouldn't be in that spot, basically, you really shouldn't be in the spot. And so what I'm showing here is basically what something like that looks like. So, for example, Palomar Mountain State Park, you see the area in green. What is the area that counts? So if you're up on Palomar Mountain, you can pretty much set up your antenna in any of those locations that's in green, and you would be perfectly fine to activate the park. Below is shown the activated states, which is a very modest list. And so those are kind of states I've been traveling to setting up POTA. As a hunter, you can basically make QSOs from pretty much anywhere. You don't necessarily need to be registered, but if you are registered, you can collect some awards. And those of us that know Dave, AD4VE, I believe he's the sort of most number of QSOs that he's hunted, and so he's got an award. Probably one of the highest award as a hunter, definitely in our San Diego region. Also, you can see the various states here that people have activated. And so why do I do a POTA? Like I said, I'm actually the reason I'm in ham radio originally started because I was looking for better communications in case of a emergency where you don't have any phone coverage or even satellite coverage. And then what I also find is each time you're out there, you have to plan your activation. You basically do a lot of planning. You do a lot of scouting on basically using maps, using various softwares. And then ultimately, you want to be successful to get at least 10 QSOs, which you need for an activation to count in a park. And so myself being a part of the ARES organization, and I find it's actually a great skill set to acquire when you want to set up a mobile station pretty much anywhere and in short notice. I myself, I don't spend a lot of time hunting. I much prefer activating parks. So what does a typical workflow look like? You find your park of interest, you do some recon, you look at websites, various maps, make sure where you plan to go it actually is part of the park. You select the kind of station you want to bring along, and then you decide also kind of how do you want to be spotted, because some parks there's no cell phone coverage, there's no internet, and if you don't know exactly which park you're going to be, pretty much there are several ways you can still spot yourself as being an activator, and so you can take advantage of things like JS8 call, APRS, or more recently even WinLink allows you to basically, as long as you have HF coverage to an HF node on WinLink, you pretty much can send an email to an email server, and that will spot you, and it will even download other spots, which is pretty cool. What it means, of course, is you have to have a means of running WinLink HF from your station. If you decide to do a single sideband activation, that will, of course, you get a lot of pileups, and sometimes people during non-contest, you hear a pileup. The odds are it's a POTA or a SOTA activation. CW and digital modes, they're quite popular amongst the POTA crowd. And so you find probably people split half doing CW, half doing a digital mode such as FT8 and FT4. You log, and I personally use computer log submission, and then ultimately you collect some awards. So when you go on the website, you look for your favorite park. One of my favorites is Torrey Pines State Park or State Preserve. So you see basically, okay, that's the number for that park is K3581. So that is the park number you have to memorize. And then on the right, you can already see here a pane that basically shows you who's activated the park before, how many QSOs people have landed, and so forth. Next, I'm kind of looking at various boundary maps. So I usually look at the official park map, which usually is not very high resolution. And I kind of overlay that with a bunch of other maps or tools like CalTopo I find very useful, because it basically allows you to do a fine map of where your park boundaries are. Then you go in, you plan your park activation. So I know I'm going to go to Torrey Pines. So I basically go on the POTA spotting page and I enter all the information that is needed. So basically your call sign, your reference, when you anticipate starting, and when you anticipate finishing your activation. I usually have an alternative location in mind. So if I find, okay, somebody else is doing a POTA, which actually in real life only happened once, or I find the parking lot is full or somebody's hugging the picnic tables, I usually have a couple other locations in that park that I know would be good secondary and tertiary locations. And then whenever I can, I use the internet. But more recently, I started using mostly WinLink to actually spot myself. That's an example of what a spot page looks like. So you see all the different stations and the park numbers where they are currently activating a park. And so as a hunter, you can go and look at the spots and then basically sort of pick and select the stations from parks and geographic regions that you may not have seen before, or that you know you might be able to reach by a single sideband. Then when you do your activation and you basically follow all the rules, of course, but there's some specific guidelines and etiquette that is specific to POTA. So for example, CW, you basically do, you say CQ POTA, you have to call sign twice, a park number and a K. In digital modes, you call CQ POTA with your call sign and then the grid square of the park you're actually activating. And there's some very sort of integrated ways how to reconcile that with a logbook of the world if you do that. So there's some kind of very sophisticated rules that you have to follow. Single sideband, I usually don't call that that much. I usually just call CQ parks on the air. This is my call sign. This is AF5T. And then from the park, kilo with and the 4 digits, standing by and listening. And usually you do it a couple of times. And then once you spot yourself or somebody spots you, you usually have a pile up and you're going to be busy for the next half hour to an hour doing that. There's also something called park to park. So if you activate a park and you talk to somebody else activating park, that is called park to park. And there's some extra points for people that do that. So usually when you do a activation, at some stage you say, okay, stop here, let's take all the park station, and then they specifically call you. And then sometimes what happens is you run into some QRM, and then usually if you're in a single sideband mode, you can ask anybody to basically go to the spotting page and then spot you on a new frequency. And people pretty friendly and readily do that. Most important thing is, of course, all the FCC rules and good operating practices always apply. I think the issues I've seen is when you have certain countries like Canada activate a part of responding, they sometimes use different frequencies that other countries cannot really respond to. And so you have to basically always make sure you're not responding to just any POTA call, but you follow all the FCC rules and conventions. The log submission, so I use N3 FJP. I kind of customize the log page that I use for logging. And then what I do is I log the activation with the relevant fields that are important to a POTA, and then I go in and then basically name the file, my call sign at park ID dash and the date. So that's really important to do that. Nowadays, you can upload it directly on the PODA app website, which has changed in the last year. Before that, you had to actually send it to somebody who then physically had to upload it. But now you can actually do your own uploads there. So that's kind of what the format should look like. Then you end up, once you've uploaded your log, a couple of hours, maybe a day or two later, you can go in and check, have you been given any awards? And in a PODA world, there's pretty much an award for many things, if not everything. And you also get a dashboard that shows you how close you are to the next award. I usually keep an eye out on parks activated, because that's something I really like to do. I like to activate parks and basically activate different parks and new parks. But some people actually like to go back to the same park, because if they land 1,000 QSOs in the same park, they're actually getting a major award and certificate. So people who may not be able to travel, there's still plenty of opportunity for being rewarded for that. That's a list of the San Diego County parks. I believe I activated everyone but San Onofre. I think San Onofre does belong to San Diego County, but the park, last few times I've been there, is closed. And so basically that's tough. There's, other than by sea, there's not an easy way to get there. So, but then if it's closed, it doesn't really count. So, but yeah, so I basically spend a lot of time on the coastal route and then inland, which is really great, because if you're further away from the coast, you can bring like a large antenna. You can be much more successful on a single sideband than from, say, a mobile operation near a parking lot on the beach. So the type of setups that I use is I use a travel setup that I call QRP Lite, which is based on the ICOM 705 radio. The reason I choose that is if I travel by plane, I'm pretty much limited what I can bring. I'm very much limited what I can bring on board of the plane. And for example, they don't like pointy objects going through security. So I'm pretty selective what kind of antenna I bring. I usually bring a wire or a loop. But then if I take sort of check-in luggage, then I usually have a couple ham stick antennas in my luggage there. Also, the most critical limitation is the battery capacity or the battery size. Currently, I believe it's still 144 watt hours as carry-on. And so that's the max allowable. It's different for lithium polymer than it is for a lithium iron phosphate. And then also, I usually bring like a tuner, because I know, especially if I'm running a wire or a ham stick, I may not always have the best antenna with me. Initially, I brought a Surface Go 2, which I like, but then more recently, I decided to take something different. And what you see there is a Dell, a pretty old Dell rugged laptop that I was able to find on eBay for really inexpensive. And the great thing with a Dell rugged laptops is you pretty much can submerge them in water and they still will function. So when I was on Kauai recently in a rainstorm, the one thing that was working really well was the laptop, even though it was being rained on. So that's the real test for a good activation. Same thing is it's also scent proof or dust proof. So if you're in environments that is really where you don't know what you're getting, it's a phenomenal a laptop. This particular one I was able to get probably for less than $400. And the other thing is you can use it outdoors because the screen is super bright. And so even though it's much heavier than the Surface Go, it's a much better laptop in the field. And so I pretty much do everything on there. So that was us running 10 watts out of Kauai. That was the Kauaian East Coast. And on digital, I've generally not had issues reaching the mainland New Zealand from there. I think the furthest I got was some island of West Africa on 10 watts. The time of day is important, of course, and just being lucky that somebody's out there that's listening to you. But specifically in Kauai, I actually had a lot of help by a ham that lives on Kauai because he got, once he knew somebody was doing a park activation in his backyard, he called all his hams on Kauai, and suddenly had a lot of local folks participate as well.
I had zero luck.
It's super hit or miss. This one activation, I pretty much had to spend 8 hours trying to get 10 contacts. That's the next kit. So that is basically, that's what it looks like. So when I take my loop, I do like that because it's really like, you pretty much can fit that in a backpack when you disassemble it. And I was actually impressed how many contacts I was able to land with that loop on probably 5 watts out in Arkansas. And then that's usually when you see me locally, you see me in the Jeep, or you see the Jeep mostly. And I basically recently switched to a 7100, an ICOM 7100, with a couple of hustlers that I mounted that are good enough for sort of POTA activities. The reason I've become more and more conscious of making sure I can operate straight out of my car is because a lot of the parks on the ocean, it's very, very hard to get permission to put up a regular antenna, or usually if somebody sees you, they ask you to take it down because of a trip hazard or perceive it as a safety hazard. And so I found if you can basically operate with either ham, like that stick antenna, excuse me, straight from the beach, or more recently, I pretty much mounted it straight to a Jeep. That's another activation. I was doing, I think it's in Anza Borrega, so that's operating from the trunk. That's a specific spot where you have actually 2 parks. There's a park and a trail that intersect. And so that counts as a twofer activation because you can basically activate both the park and the trail. My personal favorite is Lake Paris around here in, I think it's Riverside County, just because it's very pretty out there. But it's also, you can set up some decent antenna. And I think Roger has seen that inverted delta loop live at one of our San Marcos events. But that's an antenna that has some directionality, and especially on 20 meters. It gives you a very, very good sort of properties for a single sideband, especially. Then there's some other hams, and those that know Rob K6 RGF, that's his POTA app setup. He's actually, this particular setup is in somewhere in Arizona, where he's activating a park, and him, like myself, we always like to do logs both by computer as well as paper logs, because very occasionally you may run into issues where the software crashes or your log isn't properly saved or gets corrupted. And so that's so Rob basically uses a drive-on mount and I think it's a body pole dipole that he uses for his activations. Then ultimate question tonight is why car mobile? There's basically if you want to basically do more than one park activation, there's certain awards that kick in when you get more than 5 parks activated. And in order to do that, you really have to pace yourself where you go, where you drive, where you activate. Anytime you jump out of a car and try and set up a station antenna, you're using precious minutes. And so that was my original motivation. But then I found there's certain locations like Point Loma. Pretty much the only way you can activate Point Loma is from your vehicle. Like this, nobody will let you put up an antenna on Point Loma, and the other location is Old Town. In the Old Town parking lot is pretty much the only location they can activate. Some people facetiously call parks on the air parking lots on the air because in some locations, especially our coast, you're pretty much limited to the parking lot. So Chris mentioned me kind of to show like my latest setup in my Jeep, and I'm gonna see what I can point to that, but basically you see like my laptop here, the Radiohead, that's the 7100. Then in the back of the Jeep, I have a box basically that contains the actual radio, that contains a bunch of peripherals. And because I have a lot of antennas that I use for other VHF and UHF things, I pretty much spend a lot of effort to make sure if I transmit on one antenna, that doesn't cause interference or kill a radio if you're in that close proximity. And so I built a lot of bandpass filters in that box there. And then this one's here in Torrey Pines Beach location. You see kind of I'm doing a digital activation of that beach, and in a few hours I probably landed about 100 QSOs just from that location, including an island somewhere in the middle of Europe that I've never heard of before. So right now conditions are just phenomenal. Biggest blunders, and I always like to do that because I can still kick myself for doing that. If you remember in POTA, so if you activate a park, your activation counts as one activation if it happens within the same Zulu day. The challenge is if you're in a Zulu day transition, which happens at 4 p.m. Pacific time, but it's not always 4 p.m., it's sometimes 5 p.m., depending on summer and winter time. And so there's a particular activation I was doing that came very, very close, and I mistakenly assumed it was 5 p.m., but it was actually 4 p.m. And so I had 8 QSOs, I believe 7 or 8 QSOs by 4 p.m. And then I decided to stay on for that extra couple of QSOs, and then decided to pack up. And when I came back, I started to realize, oh, wait a minute, had I basically stayed probably another hour, I probably would have activated a park in the evening, but I didn't. So that was lesson learned. Then there's one instance where I tried to activate a park in California, Northern California, and even after 3 hours of trying all modes, I was able to land one QSO. So that's kind of par for the course. And then, of course, the other blunder is, or the other thing I did was when my wife and I were out camping on Big Bear, basically I didn't realize I was in the confines of a park. So I didn't actually do any POTA activities there. Then fun facts, I did activate a number of parks, especially in Oregon and Hawaii, that had never been activated before. And so that's always something that you feel very good about, that actually he managed to do that. And then, of course, I keep kind of a mental log of the kind of questions that I get from the public. And there's a lot of questions you get from the public. And the most interesting one I find, probably the most common one, especially here in Southern California, is, am I communicating with space aliens, or am I hunting the UAPs that been seen outside the coast? So that's always get a question here and there. But then very few people actually know about ham radio, and so it's a great educational moment to basically say, yeah, I'm communicating right now. I'm just landed a contact with somebody in New Zealand or Japan. So it's a great way to kind of meet the public. And then, of course, my best moment so far in POTA activations was I actually ran into two hams from the POTA organization that just happened to be driving through Southern California. And we actually encountered each other in Cardiff State Park with about 40 minutes to spare. And so we came up with a strategy and band plan. Okay, you're going to be on 17 meters. I'm going to be on 20 meters. And then at the same time, we landed some QSOs by a VHF from a kind of IQSO distance, which you can do. So anyway, and this basically Tom and his wife, Julie. Tom's actually a person that maintains all the security and the website for the POTA. And most impressively, you don't see that, their car's license plate actually says POTA from Michigan. So that's a dedication. I think I like to finish just saying what I've seen is that there's a lot of interest in digital modes in POTA as well. There's a lot of people using FT8 and FT4. The one challenge I see is a lot of people forget their computer at that time basically creeps out of spec. And so you see a cycle of transmissions that is so far out that you will not actually be able to decode that in software. So what I found is really important is you have to kind of get a GPS lock, like use a GPS dongle, so to do a GPS lock time synchronization sequence that you run. There's a couple of softwares. I personally like the BKT time sync. And so if you have good GPS coverage, that is probably the best way to go. And the next best thing I found was there's a app called JT Sync that basically listens to the heartbeat of the transmissions, and that basically calculates the average cycle of that heartbeat. And so you can basically synchronize your, not necessarily your clock, but your transmission reception cycle with what happens, what else happens in that sequence. Then lastly, I only had to resort to that one. If you're familiar with WWV, the NIST atomic time, if you have very, very good reaction time, you can actually listen to that and adjust your clock in the process. But I personally, I always like to go back to a GPS lock. Okay, and oh, I think, did I kill that? See. And so what I was going to throw out is, let's see if we go to the last slide. Yeah, firstly, I wanted to acknowledge all the folks that helped me. Of course, goes without saying that Todd, N6XDX, actually introduced me to POTA. I believe Todd is a member of PARC, and I encountered him, not in the park, but I encountered him testing some ham equipment. And then, of course, since then, we become friends. Tom from the POTA organization, a couple of YouTube channels that I usually listen to that are focused on POTA, that's specifically KB9 VBR and K4 SWL. They basically tape the entire activations and put it on YouTube. Then, of course, K6 RGF, only ham that I know that's actually landed a fiver, park to park. So he communicated with somebody that was in 5 parks all at the same time. And that's a big accomplishment. KN6 LFB, he actually, he's local in the Ramona area, and he's able to help me find opening times for some park that I never managed to activate. And then 84VE for being probably my favorite hunter, usually land one CUSA with him when I activate. And then John Martin, WH6EY for rallying up the whole Y POTA folks to start listening when I was doing activations there. So any questions? But before maybe we go to questions, I was going to throw out if anybody's interested to do a park, a POTA activation, like a Palomar Amateur Radio Club POTA activation. There's some great locations on Palomar Mountain that are really suitable for a sort of bigger group, and be happy to find a date to go out there, and if anybody's interested. Anyway, I'd like to stop here, and any questions?
Is there a Fiesta Island that's going to be
Not from what I can see. The closest to Fiesta Island would be Old Town. So Old Town is considered a park. Technically, the only place I've been activating Old Town is the parking lot. So that's one of the parking lot locations. And you got to be super early to be in a parking lot that's within a park location. The other one is Point Loma, near the lighthouse. That's probably the closest there. Nothing in La Jolla, but then Torrey Pines, it starts kind of creeping up the coast.
How long have you been doing this?
Probably.
Repeat the question.
Oh yeah. How long have I been doing that? Probably 2 years. And pretty much whenever I can find a few, like 2 or 3 hours on weekends, I usually head out someplace, and usually Carlsbad is kind of one of my favorite locations. It's close and scenic. Any questions from the Zoom folks?
Is there a requirement to be mobile?
So if you're an activator, you pretty much have to have a mobile station or a portable station. So you have to take your gear into a park. Generally, you cannot activate, like I think there's some people that are fortunate to live right next door to a state park. And people have asked the question, can I basically put my antenna on the park property, and does that count? So that does not count. So you have to be within the confines of the park with your mobile or portable station.
You mentioned,
Thank you.
You mentioned having bandpass filters for not interfering with nearby radios. Could you elaborate on that a little bit? What kind of radios? You mean like AM radios?
So those are mostly. So the question was the kind of like the bandpass filters. Are those AM radios? I usually have the UHF, VHF. I basically have 6 meters to 70 centimeters. On that I run on different radios, and so I basically set them up so if you transmit, say on 70 centimeters, it doesn't basically the sheer power doesn't blanket out the 2 meter and vice versa. And so I usually use VHF, UHF specific bandpass filters, and 6 meter. For HF, I basically I've not observed any significant interference.
Thank you.
So how many radios are you running?
Good question. So how many radios on my Jeep? On a permanent installation, there are 3 radios, but 4 radios. But then I usually have 1 or 2, dependent on what I'm doing. And it's parked outside, so if you have good eyes and flashlight, happy to show. But then what I did have to do is build a ground plane for the various antennas to make sure and space the antennas. So I have I don't have too much interference and a good transmission.
I was going to say, did you? Is there a memorable episode that you can share?
I think that there's been many. I usually get did I have a memorable cue? So I think the most memorable one was Tom Martin and Julie Martin. Just basically ended up in the same park. They're part of the POTA organization. I had just gotten there and I was just about to call QSOs, and then you get the POTA organization show up and park next to you. So I think that was probably the most memorable event. I think the second most is probably when I was in Hawaii. The first QSO I landed on Hawaii was actually with a local ham, who then we basically started strategizing. So for him, it was like the first day of actually doing POTA, but then we started strategizing about the parks, what to do. And I think if I go back there, I probably can borrow some batteries. So I'm not necessarily limited to 5 or 10 watts. And so just that community feel was special. And I think every activation, there's something memorable, like it's all in really beautiful locations here, Southern California, being along the Oregon coastline. Like I'm always fascinated by sea stacks, and so you're basically sitting right in a park and watch the waves and sea stacks. So it's like I see every POTA, every activation has a special moment. But if I had to do one, it'd be for Tom and Julie Martin.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you very much.
Right.
That was a fantastic presentation.
Right. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, our pleasure. Hey, Mark or somebody online, can I ask a favor? Can you take a quick screenshot just so we get a record of everybody online, unless Glenn thinks he's...
Sir, it's already done.
Thank you.
Glenn asked me to take care of it.
Oh, Glenn's ahead of me. Okay, good deal. All right, let's see. If you haven't signed in the room, the sign-up sheet is right next to the laptop over there. So please make sure you sign in. It really helps us keep an idea of who's been here. And if you'd like to get our newsletter, if you'd like information on membership, talk to Glenn, AISXR, right over there. And if there's no other questions or comments, I think we are done. So thank you everybody for coming, and we'll see you. Oh, Chris, do we have a next month? Not yet. Okay.